From the moment I moved into the neighborhood, everything seemed perfect. The house was modest but comfortable, the yard was wide and green, and the street had a quiet charm that felt safe and welcoming. It was the kind of place where families waved as they passed, children rode their bikes along the sidewalks, and people took pride in their homes. For me, it was everything I had hoped for, but that peace didn't last long. The very first sign of trouble came from the house next door, a property that looked sharp on the outside but carried an air of tension the closer you came to it. The woman who lived there seemed to constantly hover around, watching, glaring, and inspecting every move I made. She was the kind of neighbor who didn't greet or wave but instead narrowed her eyes like she was memorizing your every action. Her reputation preceded her. Other neighbors mentioned her casually, but always with a shake of the head or a sigh. They called her Karen, not even bothering to use her real name, because her behavior had already earned her that title. Complaints, arguments, petty fights, Karen was at the center of all of them. I thought maybe if I kept to myself, she would leave me alone. I was wrong. The first real issue came when I noticed her wandering onto my lawn. At first, I dismissed it as a mistake. Maybe she was just passing through or chasing after her dog. But then it became a pattern. She would stand near the property line, hands on her hips, and stare down at the grass like she was calculating something. Sometimes, she even walked up close to my fence posts, squinting at them as if she were studying where the line was drawn. Then came the comments. Though she rarely spoke directly, I could overhear her muttering to herself loudly enough for me to catch words like uneven, wrong, and shouldn't be here. It was unsettling, but still, I told myself not to overreact. That was until the day I came home and saw something shocking. Karen had placed little orange construction flags along the property line, but not where the survey said it was. Instead, she had shifted the line several feet into my yard, marking a strip of land that very clearly belonged to me. My stomach sank, and a knot of anger twisted inside me. This wasn't an accident anymore. She was planning something. The next morning, the sound of hammering woke me. I stepped outside to find Karen in her yard, tools scattered around, wooden posts lined up neatly along the row of flags she had placed. My suspicion was confirmed. She was building a fence. And not just any fence, she was pushing it directly into my property. It felt like a violation, a blatant theft of the land I had worked for and paid for. A yard wasn't just grass and dirt, it was part of the home, part of the value, part of the freedom I had earned. Watching her confidently hammering those posts in, acting as if she owned the space, made my blood boil. I knew right then that this wasn't going to be a small dispute. This was the beginning of something much larger. I spent the rest of the day documenting everything, photos of the flags, pictures of the old property markers, copies of my deed. I had no intention of letting her get away with this. But Karen wasn't the kind of neighbor to back down easily. She thrived on conflict. And the more she pushed, the more determined I became. The fence started to rise day by day. Each new section she built felt like a brick wall closing in on me, reducing my space, erasing my rights. Other neighbors noticed too, whispering about how bold she was being. Some even shook their heads, wondering why she thought she could get away with something so obvious. But Karen carried on without hesitation, as though she had already won. It was no longer just a boundary dispute. It was a test of wills, a battle of principle. And I knew, deep down, that if I didn't fight back now, I'd lose more than just a strip of grass. I'd lose my place in this neighborhood, my peace of mind, and my ability to stand up for myself. As I stared at that half-finished fence cutting across my property, I realized this was only the beginning of the war. The half-built fence loomed like an unwanted shadow across my yard. It wasn't just the wooden posts or the crude panels Karen was forcing into the ground, it was the blatant audacity behind it. She was claiming a part of my property right in front of my eyes, with no regard for boundaries, laws, or even basic decency. The neighborhood began to buzz with gossip. People walking their dogs would pause at the sight of her fence, shake their heads, and whisper among themselves. A few even glanced toward my house with sympathetic looks, as if they knew I had been dragged into the storm that had long been brewing around Karen. She had a reputation for clashing with others, but this time she had taken things to a dangerous level. I knew I couldn't just sit back. The first step was gathering proof. I dug through every file I had from when I bought the home. The survey papers, the deed, the old photographs of the property lines, all of it became my ammunition. I snapped new photos, showing her fresh fence posts jutting into my lawn, each one crossing the invisible but legal boundary that marked my yard, but Karen wasn't stupid. She carried herself with the smug confidence of someone who had done this sort of thing before. She strutted around her yard while hammering nails, humming to herself like she had already won. And the more she worked, the more my frustration turned into determination. Finally, I approached her, not with anger, but with cold clarity. Though I never shouted, my presence alone seemed to irritate her. She made a point of ignoring me at first, hammering harder as if the sound itself would drown me out. But when she finally glanced up, the look in her eyes wasn't that of a neighbor caught making a mistake. It was the look of someone who felt entitled. Though no words passed between us, the air itself became thick with tension. She was daring me to challenge her, and in that silent standoff, I realized that nothing short of official action would stop her. That night, I filed a complaint with the HOA. Normally, I despised involving them. The association had a reputation for nitpicking small details: trash cans left out, lawns growing too tall, holiday decorations hanging past January. But this time, their authority could work in my favor. I attached every piece of evidence: photos, surveys, the original property map. The email I sent wasn't angry, it was precise, detailed, and impossible to ignore. Days passed, and Karen continued building, almost as if she knew I had complained and was doubling down just to spite me. Her fence stretched farther across my yard, an ugly scar that mocked me every time I looked out the window. But then, finally, the HOA responded. They sent an inspector. The day the inspector arrived, Karen stood tall, arms folded across her chest, as though she had already prepared a speech. But her smug smile faded when the inspector pulled out the official survey documents and began walking the property line. Step by step, measurement by measurement, the truth unfolded. Karen's fence wasn't just slightly over the line, it had intruded deep into my yard. I could see her face twitch, her confidence faltering, but she refused to back down. She followed the inspector around, muttering under her breath, shaking her head, insisting the survey must be wrong. But the evidence was overwhelming. The inspector snapped photos, made notes, and informed her that the fence violated both HOA rules and property boundaries. For a moment, I felt victory. I thought this would be the end. But I underestimated Karen. Instead of stopping, she doubled down. The very next morning, I woke to the sound of construction again. She had ignored the warning, ignored the HOA, and continued extending the fence as if she believed sheer stubbornness could rewrite property lines. It became clear, Karen wasn't just bold, she was reckless. And if I didn't escalate, she would bulldoze through every boundary I had. That night, as I sat staring at the document spread across my table, I realized something important. This wasn't just about a fence anymore. This was about control, power, and standing up against someone who thought rules didn't apply to her, and if she wanted a fight, she was about to get one. The HOA's inspection should have been the end of it. Most people, when confronted with clear evidence, would have stopped. But Karen wasn't like most people. She thrived on confrontation, feeding off of conflict as if it gave her energy. The morning after the inspector's visit, she continued hammering in her yard as if nothing had happened. Every thud of her mallet was a challenge, every new post a declaration that she didn't care about rules, documents, or authority. It was infuriating, and I knew I had no choice but to take the next step: legal action. I contacted a property attorney. Sitting in the quiet office, I laid out every document, every photo, every measurement I had collected. The attorney leaned back in his chair, glanced at the evidence, and gave a small nod. His words were calm but certain: "You have an airtight case." From that moment, the gears of the legal system began to turn. Karen received her first official notice shortly after, a cease and desist order demanding she stop construction immediately and remove the encroaching fence. For a brief moment, the neighborhood felt tense but hopeful. Everyone thought that surely now, with the weight of the law pressing down on her, Karen would fold, but instead, she grew bolder. She scoffed at the notice, waving it around in her yard for neighbors to see, mocking it as if it meant nothing. She even told people she had friends in high places and that no one could touch her. By then, the fence had already cut deep into my yard, and she had even begun planting shrubs along the stolen strip of land as if she intended to make the theft permanent. That arrogance only made my attorney push harder. We filed a lawsuit for property encroachment, demanding not only the removal of the fence but also financial compensation for damages. The news spread quickly, and suddenly, Karen wasn't just battling me, she was under the watchful eyes of the entire neighborhood. As court documents were served, her mask began to crack. The smug confidence turned into forced smiles, and the whispers around the community grew louder. Some neighbors avoided her entirely, while others quietly cheered me on, telling me they had endured her antics for years but had never dared to fight back. Karen still tried to act untouchable, but the weight of the case was pressing down. The days of her ruling the neighborhood with intimidation were numbered. The first hearing was scheduled, and I knew it would be the turning point. The courthouse was a far cry from Karen's front yard, and for once, she couldn't control the narrative with her smug confidence. She arrived with folders clutched in her hands, whispering furiously to her attorney, while I sat calmly beside mine. From the moment proceedings began, it was clear Karen intended to fight dirty. She claimed the property line was mismarked, insisting that my survey was outdated. She argued that her family had used that strip of land for years, as though her constant hovering near the property somehow translated into ownership. She even went as far as to claim I had moved the markers after buying the house, but lies crumble under evidence. My attorney presented not only my survey but also the county's original property records. Old satellite images showing the untouched boundary line, and testimony from the inspector who had measured everything in person. With each piece of evidence stacked against her, Karen grew more desperate. Her confident smirk vanished, replaced by a tight jaw and nervous glances. When her attorney attempted to discredit the inspector, the judge shut it down immediately. The facts were undeniable, and Karen's fabricated stories were falling apart in real time. Neighbors who had come to witness the case later told me they had never seen her look so small. For the first time, Karen wasn't in control. By the end of the hearing, the judge ordered her to halt all construction immediately and warned that failure to comply would result in steep financial penalties. A second hearing was scheduled to determine damages and restitution. Back in the neighborhood, Karen's unraveling became more visible. She stormed around her yard, glaring at anyone who dared to look her way. Her once proud fence now stood as a crooked monument to her arrogance, frozen mid-construction by the judge's order. And while she still muttered under her breath about conspiracies and unfairness, the truth was clear: she was losing, but Karen wasn't done yet. In her mind, there was still one last card to play. Karen's defiance reached a breaking point. Despite the judge's clear order, she refused to take down the fence. Days turned into weeks, and the structure remained, jutting into my yard like a splinter no one could ignore. The HOA, now fully aware of her disregard for rules, turned against her. What once had been her weapon, a system she used to harass others with petty complaints, was now working against her. They issued fines, letters, and warnings, piling one after another. Each day she ignored them, the penalties grew steeper. The legal system doesn't move quickly, but when it does, it moves decisively. At the follow-up hearing, the judge had seen enough. Karen was ordered to not only remove the fence at her own expense but also pay damages for trespassing, legal fees, and fines from the HOA. The amount wasn't small, it was thousands of dollars. Her face twisted with disbelief as the judgment was read. The proud, confident neighbor who once strutted through her yard was now cornered, her arrogance collapsing under the weight of her own actions. Soon after, contractors arrived, not hired by me, but forced upon her by the court's order. Piece by piece, her fence was dismantled and hauled away. The strip of stolen land was returned to its rightful place, but the scars and the dirt were a reminder of the battle fought. Neighbors watched quietly as the demolition happened. Some smirked, others openly whispered, and a few even recorded it. Karen, once the tyrant of the block, now stood powerless as her failed conquest was stripped away in front of everyone, but the worst was yet to come. The financial blow hit hard. Rumors swirled that she had to dip into savings, even take out loans, just to cover the court-mandated payments. Her arrogance had cost her dearly, and her pride was shattered. She became a ghost of her former self, no longer the neighborhood's loudest voice but instead a shadow peeking through curtains, avoiding eye contact, and retreating deeper into isolation. The fence was gone, but its absence marked more than just a victory for me. It signaled the end of Karen's control over the neighborhood. Without her intimidation and false confidence, she lost the grip she once had over others. The HOA, emboldened by the legal outcome, began cracking down on all of her long-ignored violations, unapproved yard decorations, neglected maintenance, and even her improper trash disposal. Every letter and fine that once terrorized her neighbors was now landing at her doorstep. Financially drained from the lawsuit, she struggled to keep up. Late fees piled up, her home fell into disrepair, and whispers about foreclosure began to circulate. The woman who once boasted about her connections and her ability to bend rules now found herself drowning in them. Her fall from power became complete when a for sale sign eventually appeared in her yard. Whether by choice or by force, Karen was leaving. The neighborhood, once dominated by her presence, began to breathe again. Families that had tiptoed around her now felt free. Children played without being scolded. Neighbors greeted each other without the tension of her constant surveillance. As for me, I stood in my yard, the yard she had tried to steal, and felt a peace I hadn't known since the day I moved in. It wasn't just about the land. It was about standing up for what was right, about refusing to be bullied, about protecting not just my property but the integrity of the community. Karen thought she could take what wasn't hers. Instead, she lost everything: her money, her reputation, and eventually, her place in the neighborhood. The lesson was clear: arrogance and entitlement might build walls, but truth and persistence will always tear them down. And as her moving truck pulled away for the last time, the neighborhood finally returned to the peaceful place it was always meant to be.